This is my true story. I built a house with my bare hands so my son could live better than I ever did. I worked every day, every night, paid every bill, and gave him everything he ever asked for. When I got old, I thought I'd rest in peace under that same roof. But instead, he kicked me out and gave my room to his in-laws. I slept in the shed while they laughed inside my house. I didn't fight back. I just signed one paper the next morning, and it changed everything. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And subscribe so my story can reach more people. I started building that house when I was 24. Back then, I didn't have much, just a shovel, a small piece of land, and the will to make something that would last longer than me. Every brick was paid for with overtime shifts and busted hands. I worked in the heat, in the rain, sometimes until midnight. I poured the foundation myself, laid every tile, wired the lights, and built the porch plank by plank. That house wasn't just wood and concrete. It was my entire life's work. I raised my son inside those walls. He learned to walk on those floors. Every corner had a memory. His first birthday, his school photos on the living room wall, his mother's laughter echoing through the hall before cancer took her. After she died, that house became the only thing that kept me together. I promised myself I'd keep it standing no matter what. I never bought fancy things, never wasted money. Every dollar went into that property. New roof, new wiring, better plumbing. I made sure it was perfect, so when I got old, I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. I thought it would be my safe place. I thought I'd die in that same bedroom I shared with my wife, and my son would take care of me the way I took care of him. But time has a way of showing you the truth about people. When he got married, things started changing, slowly at first. He stopped calling me dad and started saying old man like it was a joke. I laughed it off because I thought maybe that's just how kids talk these days. But jokes stop being funny when they start sounding real. He moved his wife in and I gave them space. I didn't complain. I handed him the keys, told him to take responsibility. I thought I was passing down something meaningful. Instead, I handed over my peace. The laughter in the house wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't warm. It was loud, sharp, and never included me. They had friends over almost every weekend. I stayed in my room, out of the way, just listening. I kept the bills paid, the lawn cut, and the taxes up to date. Everything was still under my name. I never missed a payment in 40 years. Sometimes I'd walk past their room and hear them whispering about money. I'd hear my name mixed into their sentences, but I never said anything. I knew where it was heading. I've seen enough life to know when people start looking at you not as family, but as a wallet. I didn't want to believe it, but it was happening right under my roof. When my son's in-laws started visiting, I was polite. I cooked for them, gave them my seat at the table, even told them to make themselves at home. I thought that's what good families do. But soon, they came more often, stayed longer, acted more comfortable than they should. It didn't bother me at first, until one day it did. The signs were all there, but I didn't see them because I was still holding on to hope that blood meant something. That house stood for everything I believed in: work, loyalty, and family. But I didn't know it would become the same place where I'd learn betrayal the hard way. I used to walk around and run my hand across the walls, proud of what I built. Now those same walls heard the beginning of my humiliation. I didn't say a word. I kept fixing leaks, painting walls, cleaning gutters. I thought maybe things would change, maybe they'd realize what that house really meant. But they didn't. To them, it was just property. To me, it was my life. And soon, they were about to take it. One room, one insult, one signature at a time. It started small. My son stopped helping around the house. The same boy who once ran to grab my tools now sat on the couch with his phone while I fixed his sink. He used to thank me for everything. Then one day, he just stopped. Gratitude turned into expectation. Expectation turned into orders. He'd leave lights on, pile up bills, and tell me he was handling things. But nothing was ever handled. I still paid for everything: the property tax, the insurance, even the groceries. I was still keeping that house running while he acted like it was his. Then came the tone. The way he spoke to me changed. No more dad. Just old man, you, or silence. His wife followed his lead. She'd roll her eyes when I walked into a room, whisper something under her breath, and smile when he laughed. The respect was gone, replaced by something worse: pity. They treated me like I was just waiting to die so they could take over. I could feel it every day. It was in the way they talked about money, in the way they avoided looking me in the eye. After his wife's parents started visiting more often, things got worse. They acted like they owned the place. They parked in my driveway, used my chairs, drank my coffee, and left their mess for me to clean. My son didn't say a word to stop them. He looked proud, like having them there made him more important. I stayed quiet, watched from the porch, and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I thought maybe this was just a rough patch, that one day he'd remember who built everything he was standing on. But greed doesn't stop by itself. Once people taste it, it becomes hunger. It became clear when they started talking about the future of the house. My son said it was time to update ownership, that things needed to be simplified. I didn't argue. I let him talk. I knew what he was really saying. He wanted the house in his name, the same house I built brick by brick, the same house I never once asked him to pay for. I sat there and nodded, pretending to agree, because I wanted to see how far he'd go. Then one day, he said something that hit harder than any insult. He said, "Dad, you should relax. You don't have to worry about these things anymore." That was the moment I understood. He didn't see me as part of his family. He saw me as a problem to manage. He wanted my silence, not my presence. He wanted the house, not the man who built it. I noticed his wife's parents bringing boxes one weekend. They didn't leave that time. They unpacked. My son carried in their suitcases like he was doing them a favor. They laughed, drank wine, and celebrated while I sat outside, trying to figure out what was happening. When I came back in, my room door was open, and strangers were setting their clothes in my closet. That's when it stopped being disrespect. That's when it became war. They had no shame, no hesitation, no gratitude. My son avoided looking at me as I stood there. He just said, "You can use the small room by the hallway." That's when I understood what kind of man he had become. A man who valued comfort over blood. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded and moved my things quietly. They thought I was weak. They thought they'd won. But they forgot one thing. Every nail in that house, every paper in the drawer, every line on the deed still carried my name. I didn't say a word. I went to bed that night in a small room and made a promise to myself. I wouldn't fight them with noise. I'd fight them with ink. It was a Saturday afternoon when it finally happened. I came home from the grocery store carrying 2 small bags of food. Nothing fancy, just bread, milk, and a few cans. I walked into the house and heard laughter from upstairs. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made a house feel warm. It was the kind that made your stomach turn. When I reached my bedroom door, I froze. My bed was gone. The closet was open. 2 strangers, my son's in-laws, were standing there unpacking their clothes into my wardrobe. My old photographs were stacked on the floor like junk. My chair, the one I used to sit on every evening, was gone. They didn't even stop what they were doing. They smiled like they belonged there. My son stood behind them, arms crossed, pretending to look busy on his phone. He didn't say anything for a while. He just pointed down the hallway, toward the small storage room near the laundry. That's when I realized what he meant. That was where I was supposed to stay now. In a box-sized room with no window, no fan, no space for anything but a bed. The room I built with my own hands was now a guest room for people who didn't even live there. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I walked down the hallway, opened the door to that tiny room, and looked around. It smelled like dust and detergent. There was barely enough space for me to turn around, but that was where they wanted me. Out of sight. The same house I built had no room for me anymore. My son didn't help me move my things. I carried my few clothes myself. Each trip down that hallway felt heavier than the one before. By the time I finished, my back hurt, but I didn't say a word. I sat on the edge of that small bed and looked at the ceiling, thinking about how a man can work his whole life only to be treated like he doesn't exist. That night, I heard them laughing again. The sound came from my old room. They were drinking, celebrating, watching TV. The door slammed once, then again. Every sound reminded me that I was no longer part of that home. I was a stranger living under the same roof I built. I couldn't sleep. My hands shook, not from age, but from anger I couldn't show. I thought about every nail I hammered, every paycheck I spent to keep that place standing. All of it turned against me. The next morning, my son's wife called me for breakfast, but the seat I used to sit in was already taken by her father. My cup was gone. My plate was gone. I ate standing at the counter while they talked about vacations and bills, acting like I wasn't there. They didn't even look my way. The man sitting in my chair had the nerve to call the house beautiful. I looked around at the faces that once called me Dad and saw nothing but selfishness. I knew I had no place there anymore. I started spending more time outside, just walking. I didn't go far. I'd sit on a bench across the street and watch the house. People passing by probably thought I was just some old man with nowhere to go. They weren't wrong, at least not yet. But I had something they didn't know about: the deed, the documents, the ownership that never changed. That night, while everyone was asleep, I went to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder with every legal paper related to the house: the title, the taxes, the insurance. Every one of them still under my name. I held it in my hands and felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. They might have taken my room, but they hadn't taken my power. I went to bed in that small room knowing one thing: the next time someone moved out of that house, it wouldn't be me. The nights after that were the hardest I've lived through in that house. I'd lie on that narrow bed and stare at the ceiling while they laughed in my room, the room that used to be mine. They watched movies late, slammed doors, and played music like they were celebrating something. Every sound was a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. Sometimes the smell of food would drift through the hallway, rich and warm, while I sat in silence eating leftovers cold from the fridge. They never asked if I'd eaten. They never offered me a plate. The same man who used to feed them when they visited now ate what they left behind. They started treating me like a tenant who overstayed his welcome. They complained that I walked too loud, that I left lights on, that my cough disturbed their sleep. My son didn't say a word to stop them. He just watched. I used to think raising a child meant teaching him kindness. But I learned that no matter what you teach, greed can erase it faster than time can teach respect. Each morning, I'd wake up early to clean the porch and make coffee, the same way I always did. My son and his in-laws would come down, take their cups, and talk about me like I wasn't standing right there. They said things like, "He's getting forgetful," or "Maybe it's time he moved somewhere smaller." They were already planning where to send me next, out of my own house. I'd stand there quietly, nodding, pretending not to hear. But I heard everything. I heard their plans, their laughter, their small jokes that weren't jokes at all. The woman who married my son started treating the house like it was hers. She replaced my curtains, moved my old photos into storage, and bought new furniture without asking. Her parents sat in my living room every evening, watching TV, feet on my table. I used to sit there after long days of work, proud of what I built. Now, I couldn't even look at that room without feeling sick. The more they took, the quieter I became. Silence became my only weapon, not anger, not words. Silence. Because when people think you've given up, they stop paying attention. And when they stop paying attention, that's when you make your move. One night, I woke up around midnight because of the noise. They were throwing a party. Loud music, laughter, clinking glasses. My son's wife's parents were drinking and singing in the same room where my wife once took her last breath. I walked to the kitchen for some water, and one of them shouted that I should get some sleep. I didn't respond. I just turned around and went back to that small, dusty room. I sat there for hours, not angry anymore, just done. I knew I couldn't fix them. I couldn't make them understand what family means. The only thing I could do was take back what I built and make sure they never got to destroy it again. From that night on, I started preparing. I checked every drawer, every document, every account. The house was fully in my name. The insurance, too. Even the land title hadn't been updated since the day I bought it. They thought because I was old, I was blind. But I knew exactly where everything was and how to use it. I made copies of every paper, hid them in a safe spot, and waited. Each day after that was just patience. I let them dig their own hole deeper with every insult, every act of disrespect. I didn't need revenge yet. I just needed the right moment. They thought they broke me by taking my room. They didn't know they were giving me time to build my plan. It happened a week later. My son came into the kitchen one morning with a folder in his hand. He set it down on the table like he was doing something important. He said there were tax papers that needed my signature. He claimed it was just an update to the property records so the bills could be handled more easily. His wife stood behind him, watching. Her parents sat at the dining table, pretending to drink coffee, but I could tell they were waiting for something. I looked at the folder, then at all of them, and I understood exactly what this was. It wasn't paperwork for taxes. It was a trap. Inside that folder were transfer papers. One line in the middle, small font, legal phrasing, would move ownership of the house into my son's name permanently. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd just sign without reading because that's what old men do. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and said I'd look over it later. He smiled, thinking it was done. He didn't know I'd spent the night before going through my own documents, checking every title, every clause, every rule about ownership transfer. I knew the law better than he thought I did. That night, I sat in my small room reading those papers under a desk lamp. Every word was designed to trick me. Polite, legal, and full of hidden meaning. I found the line that mattered most, the one that would hand everything to him. I took a pen and circled it. Then I laughed quietly to myself. They thought they were smart. They forgot who taught them how to sign a lease, how to pay taxes, how to run a household. I wasn't the fool in this story. I was the man who built everything they were trying to steal. The next morning, I took that same folder, left the house early, and went straight to my lawyer's office. He'd helped me buy the house 40 years ago. When I walked in, he looked surprised to see me, but smiled when I handed him the papers. He read them once and shook his head. "They almost got you," he said. "Almost. But not this time." I told him what was happening, every detail, how they moved me out, how they were trying to take over. He didn't say much. He just took out a new set of documents and started typing. Together, we rewrote everything: the deed, the ownership transfer conditions, and the power of attorney. By the time we finished, every line of that property's legal standing had changed. It was all in my name again. No one could alter it without my consent. He also added a clause to my will. If anyone tried to force or deceive me into signing anything, they would lose all rights to inheritance or assets. Everything would go to charity instead. I left his office that day feeling lighter than I had in years. When I returned home, the same folder was still sitting on the table. My son asked if I had signed it yet. I said I would in the morning. He smiled again, confident, sure of himself. I nodded and went to my room. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Because I knew when morning came, the trap wouldn't close on me. It would close on them. They thought they were cornering me. They didn't realize I was leading them right where I wanted them. Every greedy person eventually digs their own hole. I just made sure mine was deep enough for all of them. The next day, I picked up that pen. But the papers I signed weren't the ones they gave me. They were mine. The morning started like any other. The smell of coffee, the sound of dishes, the same silence between me and my son. But this time, I wasn't the quiet, helpless old man he thought I was. I was calm because the plan was already in motion. He came into the kitchen holding that same folder, trying to act casual, like nothing was wrong. He slid the papers toward me and said it needed to be done today. I looked at him and nodded. I picked up the folder, turned each page slowly, pretending to struggle to read. I even squinted and asked for my glasses just to make him relax. He thought I was stalling because I didn't understand. But the truth was, I understood everything. And I was enjoying every second of watching him underestimate me. I said I'd take the papers to the study so I could sign properly. He didn't care. He was too sure of himself to notice that I carried 2 folders instead of 1, his and mine. The one my lawyer and I prepared the day before. Inside mine were updated ownership papers, the new will, and the clause that cut him off completely if he ever tried to claim my property again. Everything looked the same from the outside. Same color cover, same labels, same layout. I had made sure of it. I walked to the study slowly, shut the door, and sat down. I placed both folders side by side, his papers on the left, mine on the right. I opened the one I had prepared, took a pen, and began signing where my lawyer marked. Every signature, every initial, every page locked the property deeper into my control, my house, my land, my decision. When I was done, I put my signed papers into his folder and left his untouched set sitting on the desk. From the outside, it looked no different. To anyone else, it would seem like I had signed exactly what he asked. When I came out, he was waiting. He smiled when he saw the folder in my hand. He didn't even check it. He just looked proud, as if the job was done. His wife's parents were in the living room, pretending not to watch, but keeping their eyes on me the whole time. They thought they'd won. They thought they finally took the last piece of control I had left. I placed the folder on the table and said it was finished. My son thanked me, trying to hide his excitement. I could see him looking at his wife, both of them exchanging small smiles. They didn't realize the only thing I signed that morning was their end. That night, I called my lawyer and told him the papers were done. He confirmed the new documents were filed, notarized, and recorded. The changes were official. My property was secure, and my son's name was completely removed from every document. If he ever tried to use that folder in any legal way, it would collapse instantly. The game was over before he even knew it began. The next 2 days were quiet. They acted like everything was normal. They still mocked me, still treated me like I was invisible. I didn't say a word. I went about my day, drank my coffee, read my paper, and waited. I knew what was coming next. Once people like that think they've won, they start planning their next move. They'd start cleaning, changing, preparing for their house. And when they did, that's when the real fun would begin. I walked around the house that night, looking at everything one last time. The walls, the floor, the photos of my wife. I felt peace, not pain. They thought I was signing away my future. I had actually signed away theirs. They just didn't know it yet. They wanted me gone. Soon, they'd find out what it feels like to be the one standing outside. The next morning came with fake smiles and polite tones. Everyone in that house thought they owned the world. My son walked around proudly, telling his wife's parents that everything was settled. They believed the papers they gave me were real, that my signature had handed them my home. They didn't know the only thing I gave them was a lesson they'd never forget. I stayed quiet through breakfast, stirring my coffee slowly, letting them talk. They bragged about how they'd renovate, where they'd move furniture, and how the house would look better once the old man's touch was gone. Every word made me more certain I'd done the right thing. By noon, my son came to me holding a copy of what he thought was the signed document. He said he would take it to the notary that afternoon. I nodded and told him to go ahead. I watched as he put on his jacket, smiled, and walked out the door, confident his new life was beginning. I stayed seated at the table, calm and still. The lawyer had already submitted my real documents to the county office. Every title, every clause, every right to that property was locked under my name. He could wave his papers around all he wanted. They meant nothing. A few hours later, he came back looking confused. He said the notary refused to process his paperwork, said the property record showed new ownership under a revised deed filed that same week. He didn't understand what it meant. I did. My lawyer's office had worked faster than he expected. What my son thought was victory had already turned into failure before he even left the driveway. I watched him pace across the living room, angry, whispering with his wife, both trying to figure out what happened. Her parents stayed quiet, realizing something wasn't right. I sat in my chair and turned on the TV. I didn't explain a thing. I just let them burn in their own confusion. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my coat, and drove to the lawyer's office again. He handed me a folder containing the certified ownership documents, stamped and sealed. Everything was in my name. He smiled and said, "They can't touch it now." I thanked him, drove back home, and placed that folder in my safe. Then I waited for the moment they'd realize what they had really signed. Later that day, my son asked me for the papers, for his records. I told him they were in the study. He rushed in, grabbed the folder I left there, the same one with my signature, and started reading. Within seconds, I heard silence. He looked pale. The more he read, the worse it got. Instead of transferring ownership to his name, the papers gave full control back to me, including the right to evict anyone who wasn't on the original deed. Every page had legal proof that they had no claim to anything. His wife came running, reading over his shoulder. Her face dropped too. The in-laws froze, realizing what they'd signed. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The paper they wanted became the weapon they gave me. The same document they pushed me to sign now made them powerless in the house they thought they owned. The law was on my side. Clean, legal, final. That night, they stayed quiet during dinner. No laughter, no music, just silence and the sound of plates. It was the kind of silence that comes when pride finally breaks. I sat there eating slowly, feeling no anger, no guilt, just peace. They thought I was an old fool who didn't understand what I was signing, but I had turned their trick into my shield. They had spent weeks plotting against me, and I had beaten them with a pen and a steady hand. The paper they wanted was the same one that destroyed them. The morning came quietly, but the air in the house was heavy. No one said a word during breakfast. My son sat at the table staring at his phone, scrolling through messages, probably from the bank, the lawyer, or whoever he thought could help him fix the mess. His wife didn't look up. Her parents whispered to each other, pretending to stay calm, but I could see panic sitting behind their eyes. I drank my coffee slowly, watching the sun climb through the kitchen window. They still didn't understand what was about to happen. At exactly 9 o'clock, a white van pulled up in front of the house. The sound of the tires on the gravel made everyone turn. 2 uniformed movers stepped out, followed by a county officer with a clipboard. My son jumped up, his face pale. I stayed seated. The officer knocked once, then opened the door. He asked for my name. I nodded. Then he looked at my son and said there was a court order to remove all unauthorized occupants from the property. My son's voice broke when he asked what it meant. The officer pointed to the paperwork. My paperwork. The same set of documents his own lawyer had confirmed were legitimate. The house was legally mine again, and everyone else was required to vacate. The movers didn't waste time. They began packing boxes, carrying out bags, and clearing the rooms one by one. My son tried to argue, but the officer stopped him. Every legal right had already been processed. Every appeal had already been denied. He looked at me like I was supposed to stop it, like I was supposed to save him. But I didn't move. I had saved him his whole life. I wasn't doing it again. His wife started crying. Her parents shouted that this wasn't fair. Fair. They used that word like it meant something. None of them called it unfair when they took my room, my dignity, my peace. Now that it was happening to them, they wanted sympathy. I didn't have any left to give. The living room emptied first. Boxes of clothes, furniture, and their precious television all stacked by the door. The hallway echoed with their footsteps, the same hallway where they used to laugh when they pushed me aside. My son kept pacing, muttering that he could fix it, that he just needed time. The officer didn't respond. He was just doing his job, enforcing what was already written in law. When they got to my old bedroom, the one they had given to the in-laws, I stood up. I walked slowly through the doorway, steadying myself on the wall. The movers were taking out their suitcases, the blankets, the picture frames that didn't belong there. I looked around that room one last time and remembered how small it felt when they pushed me out. It felt bigger now, empty, peaceful, mine again. By the time the sun reached the top of the sky, the house was silent again. The officer handed me the final notice, confirming that all occupants had been removed and the property was secure. My son stood outside on the driveway, surrounded by boxes. His wife was crying quietly beside him. Her parents stared at the ground, defeated. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I just looked at them the way they once looked at me, like they were strangers who didn't belong here. When the officer left, I closed the door slowly. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. The house was warm again. The walls didn't echo with disrespect. I walked back to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and sat down at the same table where it all started. That morning wasn't revenge. It was justice. Plain, legal, quiet. They built their plan on lies, and I tore it down with truth. They thought I'd die a helpless old man in the hallway. Instead, they left my house as homeless guests. The days that followed were quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you finally hear your own thoughts again. The house no longer smelled like someone else's perfume or echoed with laughter that didn't belong to me. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. But outside, things were different. My son's car sat in the driveway for 3 days straight, packed with boxes, clothes, and furniture he refused to move. He kept hoping I'd open the door and let him back in. I didn't. The papers were final. He knew it, and so did I. By the end of the week, he started calling everyone he knew, old friends, co-workers, even his wife's relatives. No one wanted to help. Word had spread around town about what he did, about how he treated me. Nobody wanted to lend money to a man who kicked his own father out of his house. People avoid shame like sickness. He learned that quickly. His wife's parents went back to their small apartment in Dayton. They didn't say goodbye. They just left. His wife stayed a few more days, crying every morning on the porch. I watched her from the window. She looked lost, holding her phone, waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. My son stopped talking to her. He blamed everyone but himself, said it was her fault, my fault, the lawyer's fault. Never once did he admit that greed was what ruined him. On the 7th day, she packed her bags, called her sister, and left too. He didn't chase her. He just sat in that car like a man who'd run out of ideas. By the second week, he sold the car to pay for a motel room. I heard about it from one of the neighbors. The same neighbors who used to wave at him now crossed the street when they saw him coming. He had no job, no savings, no place to stay. He'd spent everything trying to look successful. All the credit cards, the clothes, the dinners, the new furniture, all of it bought with the money that came from me. Now that I was gone from his accounts, he had nothing left. One afternoon, I got a letter from the bank addressed to him. I opened it before sending it back. It said his business account was frozen due to unpaid loans. I folded it neatly and put it aside. That same evening, I watched from the window as he came by one last time. He stood at the gate, looking at the house. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just looked. I could tell he wanted to come in, to apologize maybe. But apologies don't fix years of disrespect. They don't fix what greed breaks. He turned around, got into a taxi, and left. That was the last time I saw him. The next morning, the driveway was empty. The silence after that was different, cleaner, like the house could breathe again. I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, remembering how hard I worked to build this place. 40 years of labor, sacrifice, and loyalty. And all it took was one greedy son to almost destroy it. Almost. People in town still ask if I've heard from him. I tell them no. Some say I should forgive him, that blood is blood. But they weren't there that night when I slept in the hallway like a stray. They didn't see how his wife's parents laughed while I ate cold leftovers. Forgiveness is earned, not owed. He lost his comfort. He lost his pride. He lost everything he tried to take from me. I didn't lift a hand. I didn't raise my voice. I just signed one paper, and the world corrected itself. Now, when I look out from my porch, the air feels lighter. The sun hits the same roof he tried to steal, but it's warmer now. Because peace always feels better when you've earned it back. The house is quiet now. No footsteps, no shouting, no strange voices echoing down the hall. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the curtains. Every morning I wake up, open the blinds, and look at the yard I once thought I'd lose. The grass is green again. The garden I planted years ago is alive. It's strange how peace looks when it finally returns. Not loud, not proud, just steady. My son's name isn't on a single paper, not on the deed, not on the bank records, not even on the mailbox. Everything that used to belong to me is mine again, and this time I keep it under my own key. I sit in the same chair where I used to eat alone while they laughed at my back. Now it's my spot again. I cook what I want, watch my shows, pay my bills, and sleep when I choose. The house feels bigger, but not because it changed, because the weight is gone. For years I thought keeping peace with my son meant letting him walk over me. I thought being silent was the same as being kind. It wasn't. Silence only feeds greed. Respect dies quietly when you don't protect it. I learned that too late, but I still learned it. Sometimes the phone rings. Sometimes it's him. I don't answer anymore. There's nothing left to say. I gave him everything once: a home, an education, a start. And he gave me betrayal. People say revenge is loud, that it burns everything in sight. But mine wasn't. My revenge came with papers, ink, and patience. It came in the form of justice, not anger. The law doesn't shout. It just waits. And when it moves, it leaves no room for excuses. Neighbors stop by sometimes to check on me. They bring pie, coffee, ask if I'm lonely. I tell them I'm fine. They don't need to know that the quiet is my reward. I don't want company out of pity. I want peace, and I finally have it. I spend my evenings sitting by the window, watching cars pass by. Somewhere out there, my son is starting over. Maybe sleeping on a couch, maybe living in someone else's spare room. I don't wish him pain. I just hope he remembers. Because forgetting is how he got here. The lawyer calls once in a while too. He says everything's still in order. He laughs and tells me I outsmarted everyone. I don't laugh back. It's not something I'm proud of. It's something I had to do. A man shouldn't need to fight for respect in his own house, especially from his own blood. But life doesn't follow what's fair. It follows what's enforced. I enforced mine with a pen. At night, when the house gets too quiet, I walk through it slowly, room to room. I stop by the doorway where I once slept on the floor. The same hallway where they shoved me aside. It's clean now, empty, peaceful. I stand there for a moment, then turn off the light. The past doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me to never forget. Now I keep every document locked in a safe, every title, every account, every signature. Nothing leaves this house without me knowing. I may be old, but I'm not weak. Age doesn't take away wisdom. It sharpens it. I used to think family meant trust. Now I know family means nothing without respect. So yes, my son kicked me out and gave my room away, but I took it back, legally, calmly, completely. My revenge wasn't in anger. It was in control. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my pen. And that one paper he thought would end my life ended his comfort instead. Final thought. They kicked me out of my own room. So I kicked them out of my lives, with one signature, one paper, and no mercy.